Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, I covered a lot of stuff yesterday, and I thought about what I was going to talk about today. I thought about this a lot, actually. It's about the hypocrisy that you're seeing in government in general, and specifically in the media. And what I'm talking about is, you know, the former president had another assassination attempt. And the first word, I mean, you've known this story isn't new, but if you watch the takes afterwards from the media and Kamala Harris and a ton of others, and I've talked about Kamala Harris's response, but the one that's been making the rounds lately is where the ATF is talking about this is exactly why we need to ban weapons of war. Okay. First off, this is the first time that they've actually used the correct name and correct nomenclature. The SKS was in fact used in Vietnam. It was used in several places that we fought against as Americans. So this is a weapon of war. It is not an AK-47. It is not an AK of derivative of any kind. If you saw the pictures that they were posting of what actually was used, it's a bubbaed up SKS. And when I say bubbaed up, it is really bubba, as far as I'm concerned. Understand, I'm a purist when it comes to the SKS. I don't personally own an SKS anymore. I've had a couple when I was younger. They're great guns, but that's not what I'm talking about. Is this same picture show, this presentation, so to speak, they started talking about how this person shouldn't have access to this gun. Well, the fact of the matter is, this guy, this second assassin, wasn't totally nuts, because, well, duh, but also, he was a prohibited person. If you do not understand what a prohibited person is, let me give you a quick synopsis or a rundown of what a prohibited person is. Prohibited person, by definition, is someone who's either been flagged by a red flag law or by a red flag in those states that have them, such as New Mexico. And to get one of those, you have to either be a party to domestic violence, you have to be deemed a threat, or not deemed, accused of being a threat to the public, or yourself, or to a family member or someone else. Okay, that's for red flags. Anybody can, in New Mexico, anybody can go make this claim. And they go to a law enforcement person. The law enforcement person doesn't have to go to court. He just goes and picks you up, or picks up your guns and gives you a receipt, basically, and says you'll get them back, hopefully, after you have your day in court. Your day of court comes after the fact. You know, this goes back to what Trump had said, take the guns first, and we'll deal with the consequences later. That's the same type of mentality. That I'm still going to probably vote for the guy because he has had a chance to see how corrupt the deep state really is. That's the only way you can put it. I mean, I hate to use buzzwords that the right uses a lot. I am kind of on the right, kind of in the middle, more so than I would like to admit. But when you start talking about prohibited people, okay, the next phase of prohibited person, this is someone who has a felony conviction of any kind, or has been child molester, or and which should result in a felony in any case. I personally, this is the one case I actually really have a hard time saying no to the death penalty for the state making that decision, because they're repeat offenders. Usually a sex offender goes and does something, and then they are supposedly rehabilitated, serve their sentence, done some therapy, and then they do it again. This is 75% or 85% of criminals in that category tend to reoffend. Okay, now, the next thing you think about is anyone can be a prohibited person if you're on some sort of watch list that marks you as a terrorist. Okay, now, why does this matter? Well, when you go fill out a Form 4473, which is your background check form to get said weapon, period, when you're purchasing one. And in states like New Mexico, we have universal background checks, and it's not helped crime out at all in New Mexico. If anything, we're seeing a rise in crime in New Mexico. And they're not doing the statistics for cities like Albuquerque or the larger metro areas in New Mexico. Okay? So, if you are a prohibited person, you will fail a background check. If you are on one of those watch lists, you will fail a background check, or it will be flagged and delayed. Okay, until that is cleared up. So, this man could not pass a background check. So this brings up the big question: how did he get his gun? Okay, it's not overly hard, especially with someone of this character, that I could see going to a back alley and getting a stolen gun. I'm leaning that this was probably a stolen gun because one of the other things he did, which is a felony, is destroyed or defaced the serial number on said firearm. If you do that, and it is not a homemade gun that has no serial number, that's why it wouldn't have a serial number anyway, but it has a serial number, and you deface it, that is a felony. At a federal level, that's also a felony in most states that you live in the United States. Okay, so you can't do that. So this guy has already broken 2 laws right there. He's known for going to the Azov battalion in Ukraine and recruiting for Ukrainian soldiers to come there. So we're talking about like Wagner types. What do you call those? Private military contractors is basically what he's doing. So much so that he went to our enemy, Iran, and then said, it's okay if you kill Trump. Okay, this guy is delusional. I understand Trump derangement syndrome. Believe me, I do. I had Barack Obama derangement syndrome for a long time, at least for half of his second term. Then I realized no one really cared. Why should I? The man doesn't know my name. And that's about where I'm at politically now, is I don't believe that voting at the national level is going to make much of a difference, especially for a very blue state like New Mexico. New Mexico is very blue because of the population centers are blue, and that's the big swing. Most of the state outside of Albuquerque, Las Cruces, and Santa Fe lean Republican. But they have a tendency to keep electing for the roundhouse enough of a majority of Democrats that's a problem, So there's that hypocrisy. The ATF is literally going off and saying that because this guy, which basically is the cardinal demonstration of none of our stuff that we've ever suggested or ever enforce or supposed to enforce, has done anything to curb such an incident. This guy was still able to get a weapon. This guy was still able to make it onto the golf course. This guy was still able to, I don't think he actually got a round off. I think the Secret Service actually did their job in this case and fired at his rifle because he stuck it out through a chain link fence and they saw the muzzle and barrel of the gun, and that's what started them, trying to stop the threat. So, what do we learn from this simple incident? It's the same thing we find with school shooting. Most of the time, the shooter's known. This guy had a lengthy criminal background. Okay, so he's known by law enforcement, but the laws that are on the books or the methods these are enforced doesn't allow them to do anything about this person. That's one. Two, he would have failed or should have failed his background check in multiple ways, and yet he still got a firearm. And somehow, not just a firearm, but one of those scary black rifles. By the way, he would have had to make this into a black rifle to have that extended magazine they're showing, because the SKS natively doesn't take an extended magazine without some modification. Specifically, you're going to have to remove the fixed magazine that's on the SKS so that you can use those attachment points to use a detachable magazine, and they're kind of silly because they have this duck bill on them, and that duckbill is going to make you slower at ever changing the magazine when those magazines work correctly. And they do work correctly if you tune them and play with them and make sure that you get the right ones. I learned that. I wanted an AK-47. Specifically, I wanted an AKM. And I could never get one. What I got was a Norinco Mac 90. That was my first AK. I got it when I was 18. My dad helped me get the last bit of funds for it, and I bought my Kalashnikov, and that started the love affair with Kalashnikovs. That said, what I'm telling you is that you cannot listen to them, because when it comes to like school shootings, not only were they not known, or they were known, but they blame the gun, and they blame the victim. And that's what's going through the media right now, is they're blaming Trump for being the person he is. And admittedly, he is a little crass. But we've seen worse in the United States. We actually had, since the 60s, we've had a couple different presidents that were a little biased. And when I say biased, I mean prejudiced. Biden himself, it wasn't until, the mid-90s that he finally started coming around to not calling black people monkeys or baboons or gangsters or anything like that. All those derogatory terms. He didn't stop doing that until the 90s. Yeah, he's still the poster child for the left. And now we have Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris, too, is using her race to try to influence voters. And I think she's just an unlikable person. Specifically for me, she's just a cackling, nasty person. I don't want to be in a room with Kamala Harris. I don't know that I'd want to hang out with Trump either, to be blunt. I'd definitely hang out with Ron Paul any day of the week to just talk to the man and, see how great he is, or his son. But I don't see myself. Thomas Massey would be another one I would definitely hang out with. But I digress. This is not unusual for the two-way. And you have to be ready to fight those battles. And what I mean is you're going to have someone come at you and they're going to say, why do you need this weapon of war? And then inevitably, if you're like me, you go through why it's not a weapon of war and why you use the tools you use. And if you do it correctly, or how I do it, that is, not correctly. How I do it is I usually don't mention what kind of gun it is. I just tell them that the particular caliber, the particular rifle I use, is in common use. There's, more than 40 million of them in circulation. That's one thing. I said, two, this is my second point usually. If you've ever shot a gun, a pistol, a handgun, or a shotgun, you are more accurate with a rifle. That's just fact. You can look at your group size, and you will find out 9 times out of 10, there's some people that should be shooting competitively with a pistol, or better with a pistol. Okay, but you're going to be better with a rifle 9 times out of 10. Then I go down the caliber. I talk about how the particular rounds I use are tuned so that they won't go through walls, that they will stop a threat, and that they allow me extreme accuracy. Like if I want to put it in their eyeball, or if I want to put it in their nose, even without my glasses or contacts in, it's still possible. Okay, still very likely, in fact, because I trained to that level. And that's usually what gets to them, is when you talk to someone who's in the know, and you have that ability to say you've also trained, and have examples of how you trained, and they back off. And then usually what happens, in my experience, sample size of 1 again, is that I usually have someone come to me that heard this conversation and goes, hey man, I've never been into guns. I'm kind of scared of them. Is there any way we could go have a cup of coffee or maybe go shooting sometime? And that starts a conversation which builds new people in the 2A. Because there's not very many people I've ever taken out that didn't have a great time, and finally at the end of it understood that there's really no difference between a bolt-action rifle and a semi-automatic modern sporting rifle, because one of my favorite demonstrations is to take a watermelon and I shoot one with, and this gets expensive nowadays especially, or any melon for that matter, I shoot one with a rifle, a modern sporting rifle. And then I shoot one with one of my bolt-action hunting rifles, like my 270, one of my 270s. And what you're going to see is the sheer ballistic difference. That's just a fact. And then you go take a shotgun and you shoot the remnants. Because if you use a small, like a 5.56, and you shoot a watermelon, what you're going to see is a clean entrance wound and a big hole in the back. And that just demonstrates what it does. A good hunting round, like from a 270, from the watermelon experience, it pretty much makes the internal part of the watermelon a thing of the past. And what I mean by that is it liquefies and pushes out the back. So there's usually either the husk left or very few remnants left of something you shot with a 270. And what I mean by that is if you get to dissect it, there's going to be parts, big pieces that you'll see with a watermelon with either two calibers. Then I take a 12 gauge and I go up and I say, now compare this for precision. Okay? And that usually freaks them out and usually gets them on my side. So just remember, we're always going to be lied to because we're in the 2A, but we know better. Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.